Saturday, June 30th, 2018. And this is the 200th video I've made for this channel. No joke. This is the 200th video I've made. I think I got here, there was one week I did like 16 videos on the channel. It was during E3. So I made a lot of videos during that time. But yeah, there's now 200 videos on this channel. And what are we going to talk about? We're going to talk about the CFL and its American teams. This is no joke. When I was researching the CFL and I'm trying to learn about the CFL, I'm looking at a lot of this stuff. I didn't know that the CFL had expanded south to the United States, and it was in the mid-90s, 93 to 95. In 1993, Sacramento was awarded a team to play in the CFL. Now, they didn't do too bad, but they played at a terrible stadium. They played at Hornet Stadium, which I guess is Sacramento State Stadium, and back at the time, it was not really in very good shape. But they didn't do too badly being down there. But they were the first team that was, they were the first American CFL team. And so, but the closest team to them was the BC Lions, which was in Vancouver, 900 miles away. Now, there was supposed to be another team that was supposed to come in at the same time, and it was the San Antonio Texans. But unfortunately, the San Antonio Texans folded before the season started, which would have at least given Sacramento another team, not close, but relatively close. And I guess Sacramento had to be responsible for its own marketing. Now, in the CFL, you have to have, when you have a CFL team, you have to have a minimum of 21 non-import players, which means you have to have 21 Canadian players. And you can fill out the roster with, whoever you want after that. But in America, when they expanded south, they waived that feature. You didn't have to have 21 Canadian players on your American CFL team, which seems a little odd, but I can imagine that trying to bring down 21 people from Canada into America would cost quite a bit to have to try to figure out where to house them and give them living quarters. Because remember, CFL players usually aren't making $10, $15 million a year. They're probably making modest wages for putting their bodies on the line the way they do. So Sacramento was the first team in. And they had modest success. I mean, nothing too grand, but they had modest success. In 1994, Baltimore came in with the Stallions, Las Vegas came in with the Posse, and Shreveport, Louisiana got a team with the Pirates. Once again, Shreveport actually did very well on attendance. They were, I think, averaging about 15,000 people a game, which is, I don't think Shreveport's had a lot of it's in Louisiana, but New Orleans, Louisiana is usually where most pro teams end up. But this was in Shreveport. So by what I could read, they supported the team rather well. The team just wasn't, super good. But they were supported pretty well by the fans. The Las Vegas Posse folded after one season. They played 1 year and then they were done. But the Baltimore Stallions are the interesting one here. This is the most interesting team probably in this whole setup. The Baltimore Stallions played 2 years, 1994 and 1995, because the Southern expansion closed down for the 1996 season. They played 93, 94, and 95. They were going to play in 96, but too many teams were folding and gone. So basically the CFL just said, we're done. So the Baltimore Stallions were actually very successful as a CFL franchise. As an expansion franchise, I think they went to the Grey Cup. They lost, but they were there. And then in their second season in 95, the Baltimore Stallions won the Grey Cup. That's right. An American-based football team in the CFL won a championship in the CFL. They won the Grey Cup in 1995. Now, the reason the Baltimore Stallions had a problem, it's not that they weren't doing well in Baltimore. The problem was the Baltimore Ravens were coming. Art Modell had made a deal with the NFL to move the Cleveland Browns to Baltimore, which meant that the Baltimore Stallions were now not going to be needed because the community of Baltimore was going to have an NFL franchise again. So they knew that the Baltimore Stallions would not have much of a chance. But by what I read, the Baltimore Stallions actually refocused and became the Montreal Alouettes. So I think they are there to continue to this day as the Montreal Alouettes. So the Baltimore one is really interesting. Now, I've looked at some of the logos, and if you can, look these up. Some of the logos and color schemes are actually pretty cool looking. They were pretty sharp looking uniforms and whatnot. And the fact is, they should have had more of an advantage than they did, because they could have picked from an American football base that wasn't in the NFL, and they didn't have to have Canadian football players. They could just have all American football players. But Baltimore was really the only team that had any kind of major success. Like I said, the Las Vegas Posse folded after 1 year. The San Antonio Texans couldn't even get off the ground. They were awarded the franchise and couldn't get off the ground. Now, Birmingham had the Barracudas. In '95, they brought in two more teams, and they moved the Sacramento team. So in '95, they brought in the Birmingham Barracudas and the Memphis Mad Dogs. And Birmingham has kind of had a history of they've had the USFL team. They had, they're going to get an AFL team, AAF team. Birmingham is getting one of those. So they just can't draw in one of those big major ones, but they still do pretty well. And Birmingham's teams are usually fairly successful. But '95 was the only year for the Birmingham Barracudas. And I kind of like the name Barracudas. I thought that's a pretty cool name as well. So they ended up the season, I'm trying to figure this out. I don't know how good they were. Their attendance wasn't super great. They were in a stadium, Legion Field, which is where the new AAF team is going to play as well. It seems to be a place where they just stick a lot of people. But Legion Field is huge, and it's old. I think it's even called the Old Gray Lady. But it holds a ton of people. And if you only stick 9,000 people in an 83,000 seat stadium, it looks cavernous. It looks like nothing is there. And it may look like just like 6 or 7 people are in there. It really looks just empty. I'm trying to find the record. They don't seem to have the record of what they did for the season, which is unfortunate. I'd like to know what their record was. But if you look at their uniforms, their uniform colors were actually pretty cool as well. But they were called the Barracudas. They had a pretty cool logo. Played the 1 year. Their head coach was actually Jack Pardee, who actually coached in the NFL. So yeah, Jack Pardee was. So the problem was a lot of these. They would have some of these American coaches that would coach in these CFL leagues. The CFL is a different animal. It doesn't play like the NFL. So if you go in with an NFL mentality with CFL rules in a CFL football league, you almost tend to not do as well as you probably should. But remember, you don't get to play NFL rules just because you're down in America. You still have to play by the CFL's rules, which still gives those guys the advantage. Because the CFL and the NFL are not the same game. It's in principle they have some of the same ideas, but it's not completely the same game. And there is enough rules differences and enough nuances that it's pretty different. It's not the same kind of football. The Memphis Mad Dogs, their logo's actually really cool too. And I love the name Mad Dogs. It's a great name for that. The head coach was Pepper Rogers. Once again, very colorful. and it's just one of those things where it's like, you feel bad for some of these, but the Memphis Mad Dogs, of course, were based in Tennessee. And they only played, of course, the 1 year because they came in '95. But they had a 9-9 record, which isn't bad. 9-9, playing 18 games. But yeah, I mean, that's what just blew my mind. In the 1995 season, the Sacramento gold miners moved to San Antonio because Sacramento couldn't get a stadium built for their CFL team. And the guy that owned the Sacramento gold miners also owned a minor league baseball team. So he was trying to get a stadium built that could house both of them, a minor league baseball team and his CFL team. But Sacramento wouldn't go for it. So he moved down to San Antonio, where the Sacramento gold miners became the San Antonio Texans, which the San Antonio Texans initially were a team that folded. Here was the funny part. San Antonio wanted to call themselves the Rough Riders, the initials. And it's just like, you already have Saskatchewan with the Rough Riders. You had Ottawa with the Rough Riders. Why does everybody want to go to Canada and be called the Rough Riders? It's like, and then you had an American team that wanted to... Did you not look at the other teams and what they were named? Or maybe it wasn't the Rough Riders, maybe it was something else. But, it's just kind of odd that some of these teams, they folded so quickly. But yeah. And initially Sacramento was called the Surge. So it is one of those things. And if you look at the initial mock-ups for the San Antonio Texans, it was really kind of cool too. But yeah, see, they wanted to call themselves the Rough Riders. Now, Ottawa spells Rough Riders with a split in between Rough and Riders. Saskatchewan puts the whole name together. And, San Antonio was going to call themselves the Riders, not the Rough Riders. They were going to call themselves the Riders. But yeah, it's just amazing that there was... In 1996, of course, the whole thing folded because I think Memphis was going to fold under, and I think Memphis was going to go away. Baltimore, of course, had to move up to Montreal. Las Vegas was already gone. So Sacramento moving down to San Antonio, they got to play one season down there because they played 93 and 94 in Sacramento. They played 95 in San Antonio. But the most amazing part about all of that is hearing about the Baltimore team. The Baltimore team that won a championship as an American CFL team. That to me blew my mind. And the fact that we had 6 of them and there was the potential for there should have been a 7th, and it seemed very dodgy. The more and more I learn about the CFL, the more intriguing it is. The CFL has been around a long time, people. It really has. I think it was established in 1958. I think that even predates the NFL. Now, it doesn't, or the NFL merger. The NFL's been around a little bit longer than that. But the actual CFL in its current state, I think, formed in about 1958. So CFL's been around a long time, and they've gone through a lot of expansions. But to go from basically 8 or 9 teams up to like 15 or 16 is a pretty big deal. And they tried to do the American thing. It just didn't quite work out. They couldn't get a foothold in America. I think the unfortunate thing of Baltimore moving over made that, or the Cleveland moving over to Baltimore kind of hurt that a little bit. And other teams just could never gain a foothold. It was hard to convince some of these American cities to have better, renovations or have better, accommodations for CFL teams, because the CFL is just not huge in America. So slightly unfortunate in that, but the more I learn about the CFL, the more interesting it becomes to me. It really does. I am loving learning about it. But I had to do the thing on the American teams. Now, probably tomorrow I will do the week in review for the CFL, because I like doing that. We had our little 2 undefeated teams meet at 1-0 Ottawa and 2-0 Calgary, of which 2-0 Calgary is now 3-0 Calgary, and Ottawa's 1-1. So, yeah, Calgary right now, they're still on that undefeated watch, but I think they're the only team left this early. Only played 3 games, and we've only got one undefeated team left. Parity, that's what it's called, parity. The Argos don't play this week, so we won't see if they still go 0-2. But it's like I said, the more I learn about it, the more interesting it is. There's so many little facts and tidbits and nuggets about the CFL that are just intriguing to me, and this is a very intriguing thing because it's something I didn't even know. I've been watching American football, since the mid '80s, and so I'm right there when I'm watching the NFL, and it's at my height that you're figuring 93 to 95. I'm 19 to about 21. So I'm fully aware of whatever sports. I'm watching ESPN constantly in those days, and spending a lot of time in front of the TV watching tons of sports, really. But never remember them mentioning anything about the CFL expanding south. I think the CFL is better suited up north. I really do. I want the Canadian Football League to stay in Canada. I love the rule of having to have 21 Canadian players because they should. There should be a good mixture. You shouldn't just bring up former college players from the United States to fill out your rosters. I love seeing that there are a lot of Canadian players that are always on those teams. And the more I find out about it, I'll find out who a lot more of the stars are in the Canadian Football League. And I'm hoping that a lot of them are Canadian. I really do. I'm hoping there are a lot of, homegrown Canadian Football League stars. Something for the Canadian fans to really hang their hats on and go, yeah, we do have some former college kids and maybe even a couple of guys that played in the NFL up here, but, some of our better players are, they're Canadian born. So I would like to see that. So I'm still learning about the CFL. I love learning about the CFL. This has been a lot of fun. I'm going to, of course, do more videos on this just because it's a kick in the head for me. And maybe other people learn something. I even had one person comment saying, I'm learning about the CFL too. And they were happy to watch the video. So I thought, oh, that's awesome. Maybe they'll watch this one too and learn a little bit more. Learn a little bit more of what I did. I don't really have the time to go super in depth with all of those teams, but I might go in a future set of videos, maybe when it gets closer to the Grey Cup. Maybe I'll kind of do like just a little team by team and go a little bit deeper into their history, see if I can dig up a little bit more about each one of those American football teams. As it's in the playoffs, I can talk about the playoffs in the CFL and then dig up a little bit more on the defunct teams that are no longer there. So that's what I got for the American football teams in the Canadian Football League. And with all that being said, to the troops, past, present, and future, thanks for the freedom.